In our last conversation, we talked about offer and what happens when you intend to offer and how you actually make an offer. So now we're going to look at acceptance. And to form a contract, you need both offer and acceptance, and they need to fit. They need to work with each other in order to actually have a valid contract. And so we're going to take a look at two different cases briefly and learn a little bit more about what it means to accept. So the first case we're going to look at is trademark properties. And again, this is a great fact pattern. I've got a video that shows you a little bit about this A&E series that they were going to start on flipping homes. The show was called Flip This House, and Trademark Properties was a name of the company that was doing the flipping. And so what happened here is that they were trying to come to an agreement about how the revenues would be split for the series. So what Trademark Properties wanted was that they wanted the revenue to be split 50-50, that they were putting up the money to buy the homes and taking all the risk. A&E was bringing their production crews, and so Trademark suggested that they split the properties. Now that's not typically how A&E would do it. And so they'd probably take, I don't know, 75, 80, 90% of the revenues and give their those that they work with, that they contract to be in the shows, 10 or 20%. So it was a very different sort of split. So this happened in a phone call, and remember, oral contracts are valid. They're just very hard to prove and enforce because you're going off two different people's words on whether they, what they heard and what they thought they said and what they interpreted. So they're very difficult to enforce. One of the principles that I like to make sure I tell people is, yes, oral contracts are enforceable, but rarely do you actually get to enforce them. So always, always, always put your contract in writing if you can. And the old, we're going to agree on a handshake. You really got to trust the person to agree on the handshake. Put it in writing so that you can reduce your risk of having any issue come up. So in this oral contract, it was on the phone. The Trademark Properties owner suggested the 50-50 split, and the A&E representative said, "Okay, I get it." Okay, that was it. Now, sometime very soon after that, A&E sends a letter that says the board has approved the series. They just begin production without putting this down in writing. Apparently, the general counsel at A&E was asleep at the wheel in this case, so they didn't actually get it into a contract. And then when the revenue started coming in, naturally they got into this fight about how it's going to be split up. A&E wanted more, Trademark Properties wanted their 50-50, so we're going back to arguing about what does okay, I get it, what does that mean? Is that acceptance? Now, I think if you take okay, I get it at face value, it's not enough to accept. You're just saying, I understand. Okay, I get it. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, it makes sense to me. Okay, now, that in combination with the follow-up email that says, hey, this is approved, is that enough to then make this look like acceptance? Well, I think it's not unreasonable for the Trademark Properties Company to say, hey, we presented this idea, they said they get it, and then we get a follow-up email that just says, it's approved. So it sounds like, and then we just start production, it sounds like this is acceptance, right? I mean, I think it would be reasonable if you were in their shoes to understand that. Now, you put on the shoes of A&E, and you're like, well, wait a second, we didn't actually say, yes, we agree to the split. But we got to look at it from both sides, and I think in this case, the fact that it's reasonable for someone to have interpreted in the full context of what was said, that, okay, I get it, plus the board has accepted, that was in writing, the board has accepted decided to put the money up for this, that that's enough to have acceptance in this case. So, again, put your contracts in writing. The second case we want to look at is Pride versus Lewis. It's got sort of a difficult fact pattern to follow. We have a real estate contract, and the Prides wanted to sell a house. And so they sent this contract. They actually came to an agreement. When they sent the written form of the contract over, the Prides changed the date on at the closing date, they changed it by hand and initialed it. Now they'd already come to an agreement, and they were, or at least they had agreed upon what the terms would be in the agreement, and they were putting it to writing. And then you say, okay, we're going to do this. Here's the price. Sort of shake hands, and then you actually write it out, fill in the blanks on the real estate contract. Get it all in ink. And again, the Prides sent the contract over, and they had changed, written in by hand, that the closing date was going to be 2 weeks later. All right. So the question here is, was there really a contract, and were the Prides changing the date? Now, when the actual closing date came around, the Lewises never showed up, and they never let the Prides know that they weren't going to show up. So Prides want to sell this house. Lewis is saying, hey, you changed the date. We didn't need to let you know. We walked away. We're not on the hook here. So the Prides ended up selling it for kind of a fire sale, and they want to try to recoup their loss. So again, this contract came over with the handwritten signature. Lewis's never responded, just walked away from it. So is that okay to do? Was no response, did that amount to acceptance when they'd already sort of agreed to something? Well, we have a concept called a counteroffer, right? Where if you change something, it actually creates a new offer, and suddenly the one who is making that counteroffer becomes the new offeror, and the one who's receiving the updated contract becomes the offeree. We also have a concept called the mirror image rule, and that means that both sides of the contract, right, the offer and the acceptance, need to mirror each other. Okay, so we had in this situation where the offer was changed, right, or at least they had come to this sort of informal agreement, and then it was changed, and that created a new offer because it broke the mirror image rule, that they weren't accepting what they thought they had come to an agreement upon. We have a discrepancy here, and this discrepancy essentially becomes a counteroffer, that handwritten note became a counteroffer. Now, should the Lewises have informed the Prides? Were they okay in walking away? Or are they still on the hook because they just took off? They just bolted. Well, the rule is that silence does not constitute acceptance. So if someone makes you an offer and you don't say anything, there's no way you can accept. So the court looks at this and says, even though you had sort of this agreement, you were going to sell this house, and all this was going to happen, the contract was changed, a new offer was created, and the Lewises never responded, but that they didn't have to respond. It was a new offer. They never accepted, and so the Prides who were going to sell the house and made that change are on the hook for the loss here. They created a new counteroffer, and the Lewises didn't have to say anything. They could just walk away. So we have several rules here. We have the mirror image rule, we have the counteroffer rule, and then we have the principle that silence never constitutes acceptance. So it's a pretty interesting case, worth a read, and tells us a little bit more about what it means to accept. So what do we know about accepting? Always put contracts in writing. If you want to make changes in a contract, it constitutes a counteroffer. And you need to have both parties agree to exactly the same thing. You can't have one person make a change. You have to have both parties make the changes. So we often do this. If you have a written contract, we'll often make in-text changes, but you have to have both parties initial and date it. So both parties need to initial, need to date the change for that to be effective. It essentially creates a counteroffer. If one party doesn't initial as well, it's silence. Silence is never acceptance.